Good evening, everyone. It's 7:01, so I'll call this meeting to order. First order of business is we need to do the roll call. So Heather, can you do that?
All right. So Committee Member Banker.
Present.
Committee Member Papalia.
Here.
Committee Member Previn.
Here.
And Vice Chair Trainer.
Here.
And Chair Kerr is absent.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is point number 2, the approval of the minutes. So we have the draft minutes from the June 2nd meeting. And do I have a motion to approve?
No, I have a comment, please.
Okay.
Has everyone read the minutes? There's really nothing in them.
Right.
And I don't find this satisfactory. We had at least 2 rather robust discussions in our last meeting, one about the budget. And then we had a very, very robust discussion about what we were going to do about the city council meeting. Everyone talked about what the things that we thought would be important, and instead of doing a motion to do a recommendation to the city council meeting, we decided to individually send our ideas in writing or present them. I wrote to the city council. I noted that Anne did as well. I mean, because there's on the agenda, when I went in to look at it, I wasn't there for the meeting. Those were the only 2. And then there were a series of comments from Heather and City Councilor Nason. None of this is, well, and so anyway, I just don't approve of having something in which there's no acknowledgement of what we were doing. I mean, I understand it's action items, but there is a way to do it. And we had a very clear direction that was sent forth.
There was a point that we discussed that we should send an email with our concerns about the budget process or our comments about the biennial budget process, so that those could be read out at the council meeting that took place on June 7th. So does it make sense to look at amending these minutes to include the comments that were sent in?
Well, I mean, the point of the approving of the minutes is to make corrections as necessary.
Mm-hmm.
That's what this part is about.
So who would be the person that would take care of that, of gathering the comments that were sent in and then getting them into these minutes?
Well, I don't. So the question is, the comments that I put in were into the city council. So I don't know. I mean, we could have them included in these minutes as well, and Anne's as well. And I did not view the public comment section on the city council. Did either of you 2 make any public comment?
I did.
Yeah,
I did as well.
right. So we have 4, and I don't know. Did our chair did she make a comment? Public comment?
She didn't verbally make a comment. I can't remember if she sent something in or not.
Well, it wasn't reflected in the so you can, so FYI, you can always go to the city council meetings like this and online. You can click on the video, you can click on the agenda item, and they'll see in the agenda items there, you'll see public comments, and you can click on that and see what was in the public comments. It takes a little navigating. I'm trying to help some of you who may not be as aware of how everything is documented. All comments should be, that people send in are memorialized in the council meetings, and would be in, and should be in our meeting as well. So if someone mailed in emailed a comment to our meeting, it should be attached as part of the agenda.
If there was public comment related to the Financial Advisory Committee meeting agendas, it would be attached to your agendas. We have not had written public comment on our agenda items yet.
Right.
Yeah, so it does seem like in the minutes, so 0.6 of the minutes from the last meeting, discussion and possible action on matters related to the following items, and that's where it says none. And it seems to me that that's the part where at least maybe there should be some mention that the committee members were invited to submit their comments for the council. There were other things that were also discussed, just general things about in terms of the work plan for this committee. And there were sort of general comments made about possible future agenda items in terms of exploring additional revenue opportunities and just different things that were said. So I don't know what's the level of detail that is expected to be captured in these minutes from our discussion.
Chair, I may be able to help on that when you ask how much detail. So per the advisory body handbook, which all of you should have received, and most of you have attended the Brown Act and advisory body training, it's stated in there, all advisory body, with the exception of Planning and Zoning Commission and the Transportation Commission, will use action or concise summary minutes that records motion votes with little commentary. So it is the normal practice for all advisory bodies, except for Planning and Zoning and Transportation, that they are only action minute, and action minutes means just the motions are recorded. Motions and votes, sorry.
Okay.
So does that mean that we can make a motion to make a comment for the minutes?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Does that mean in order to get something into the minutes, if it's not on the agenda item, that we can make a motion to ask that it be part of the minutes?
No.
Oh.
The minutes are only to include actions that advisory body made. So
Right.
for example, if you're making a motion, we're here discussing, for example, this item, we're here discussing about the minutes. None of these will be recorded. What will be recorded is when somebody makes a motion to approve the minutes and who seconds the motion and how each member voted for the item.
How do we, wow, okay.
Okay.
And if member of the public or any member of the advisory body would like more information, we always have recordings available on the city website that anybody can watch at any time.
That was actually going to be my question is it possible to include the link? It seems like if you have minutes recording what happened, it would be convenient to include the link to the actual meeting for those that want to actually see more, some of the discussion. Is that done in the city meetings or no?
No, they're on our city website. It's on the homepage where it says meeting agenda.
Sure.
And it has, once you click into it, there's a list of all the advisory bodies, all the agendas, and the minutes.
Yeah, so I'm going to share my screen and show, which one am I going to do? Okay, so this one. This is what everyone can see this page, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So when you go to the Financial Advisory Committee webpage, if you scroll to the bottom, it'll show you agenda, minutes, video. It's all in one place.
Okay.
So I'm glad, Member Papelli, you brought this up. So I guess I feel like, I mean, for the public, I guess there's no sort of concise way to figure out what happened at the meeting. They either have to, people have to either watch the whole video or, yeah, I mean, that's what you kind of have to do. But also, I guess for us, and which is, I mean, if that's the way it is, like, you know, I'm gonna die on that hill, but it does seem a little unsatisfactory. But I guess also for the internal workings of our committee, I wasn't maybe taking as good notes as I should have, because I thought that some of our discussion items and things that we talked about doing in the future would be in the agenda. So is there some document or mechanism that we as a committee can keep track of things, or are we each doing it individually on our own notes?
It sounds like that's what we're doing. I've been keeping notes on these meetings as well. So I don't know what the rules are even around things like that. In terms of how much, you know, can we share our notes with each other, or is that considered to be, you know, Brown Act violation?
You can share your notes during a public meeting.
During the time of the meeting.
Correct.
So we couldn't send them after the fact.
So the rule is this: if you want to share with other members of the advisory body, you would also have to share with member of the public, which means, I guess there is a way if we post all your notes onto the city website.
Okay.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but with the way the video system works, if you're interested in a specific agenda item, you can click, is it in the minutes or in the agenda, where after the video is posted, you can click on that item and it brings you immediately in the video to where that agenda item was discussed?
So it was like that pre-pandemic, but because of pandemic and all the issue of the video recording, we now are marking chapter markers on YouTube video that is doing that. It's not so much on the video link, but we are changing, we're in the process of changing vendor. So hopefully starting September, everything will be back to normal, I guess.
Okay.
It would have the ability to click, for example, you want to get to right to item 6.2, then you can click on it and it will bring you to the beginning of the discussion of 6.2.
So I think the easiest way going forward, if you want to, you know, say we're going to do this, is identify during the public meeting which of your members is going to do which specific thing. And then you all only have to keep track of what you're doing, not necessarily what everyone else is doing. Does that make sense?
So we kind of have an ongoing action item kind of for ourselves, or what we're kind of thinking about or looking at, or?
Well, so it's under, I would consider it under announcements. So if you're looking into something in particular, like someone suggested they were going to go to an economic development committee meeting, under announcements, you could say, I went to the meeting and this happened.
Okay, or if you have
And
an
does that get recorded? Then where does that go in the minutes?
It doesn't. It's recorded in the video, but the advisory bodies only have action minutes. So when you take action on something.
Okay, so if you get, if I were to say, propose a future agenda item this evening, let's say, and we take action by saying, we want to keep this as agenda item for future meetings, then we can talk about it in the minutes because it's going to be on the, I guess I'm trouble understanding if you're saying you're going to be taking action on something. We'd like to take an action on making a notation in a minute of something. I guess that's action, isn't it? I don't understand why that couldn't be called action.
All I would record at that point is that someone made a motion, somebody seconded it, and you voted on it, not what it necessarily was.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, I think I need to interject at this point. You guys are steering away from the item on the agenda. The item on the agenda is approval of minutes. I understand that there are some comments that there are unsatisfactory minutes, but in terms of discussing how in the future you want to do things, it's really not agendized. So you can request this to be agendized for the future, and then you guys can have a further discussion about it.
Okay.
But
So why don't
it's
we?
not going to change the council's what's in the advisory body handbook for now.
Right.
Wow.
So why don't?
Excuse me. I've looked. I think I would suggest that everyone go into the website and pull up everybody's minutes of different meetings. And there are notations that are made that are not motions. And I understand the purpose of the action minutes. And I don't think that the purpose of the action minutes is to have a stranglehold on how these things get done. And so I'm just letting you know that I'm not going to approve these minutes. And I would ask that we put this forward to the next meeting. You don't have to approve minutes. You can postpone it until the next meeting. But this is an important issue. And the other thing is that we're a new body. So we're learning, and it's okay. So we're gonna have to find out how to then, if we have to make a motion that, for instance, that everyone's going to go to do something, then we have to vote on it, and then it goes in the minutes. Okay, but so for now, I would like to make a motion that we postpone this approval of the minutes until our next meeting.
A second.
Okay. So now we need to take the vote. So member Banker.
Yes.
Okay. Member Priven.
Yeah.
Member Papalia.
Yes.
And I'm Vice Chair Trainer. I'll vote yes as well.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So that was approval of minutes or non-approval of the minutes. The next agenda item is announcements. And this is where any staff or committee member can make announcements about the status of previous agenda items. Does anyone have any announcements?
Well, I think I was told that I can make an announcement. So of one of the things that I was supposed to do was go to the Economic Development Committee and discuss perhaps a joint working together with them on some issues. I was traveling on that date, so I was unable to go. But I did put that into my letter to the city council about working together with economic development. And council member McQuaid answered me by saying, and this was in the city council minutes, I have heard interest from both FA Financial Advisory Committee and the Economic Development Committee for an opportunity to work together on some issues. I have copied staff on this issue for further information as to the best way to do this. I think development projects could fit into this discussion of the two groups. I did have a conversation with the chair of the committee, Todd Abbott, just a little while ago, and he thought that their committee was more broad and wouldn't work well with seeing specific things. That was just my discussion with him, but that doesn't mean that we haven't had a chance to discuss it with the Economic Development Committee as a whole. So that's one thing I did follow up on.
All right, thank you, Member Papalia. Are there any other announcements? All right, if we're done with the announcements section, then it's time for public comment. If the public has any comments on any non-agendized items, now is the time.
I don't see any public attendance, so.
Okay, all right, so we'll move on to the presentation. So now we'll be doing the fiscal year 2021 fourth quarter update from Heather Rowden.
I have a short presentation about this. So how's that?
Yep.
So this was the fourth quarter update for fiscal year 2021. The numbers that you were given are, for the most part, final. There's a handful of things that are going to be trickling in because of the accounting method that we use. We are a modified accrual basis. So there are still items that are coming in that will be recorded to fiscal year 2020-21. For expenses, it's products or services that we received in June but weren't billed for yet. And for capital expenditures, oftentimes it's the work was done, but we're still questioning certain things or getting the testing done, and so we aren't going to pay the invoice until that's completed. And so it's technically a 21 expense, but the cash doesn't go out. For revenues, it's items where we technically earned the revenue in June, but we aren't actually receiving the cash until July or later. Generally, the cutoff for this is August 15th, but there are some things that go out longer. So as you're looking through everything, you'll notice that it appears as if we're going to have a fairly large surplus, which is great, but there are some things that we need to realize why that happened and what it means. So for revenues, the property taxes were up a little around 612,000 from what we originally budgeted. And that we budgeted a little bit less than we thought we would, than we technically thought would be assessed, because we weren't sure if we were going to have issues with non-payment due to COVID. So this is something that we might increase in when we bring a budget amendment in mid-year for this coming year, because it seems like Albany is not having an issue with collections due to the pandemic. Sales and use taxes, it was pretty much the same thing, where we kind of hedged our bets and we're trying to budget conservatively. And it turns out that we did better than we thought. Sales taxes were up in the air across the country, and some people won, some people lost in this, with the pandemic. The majority of the surplus is related to sugar sweetened beverage taxes. So because of the way the council is leaning towards how they want to use and track sugar sweetened beverage taxes, this isn't really a surplus that the general fund will realize in any real way. Franchise and other taxes is where we got the majority of our unexpected gains. So the UUT was higher than we thought, even with updating it for the increase in the tax rate for gas and electric. And this is one of those things where the taxes are due the month following. So from the time I issued your report till now, we've gotten in additional money. So from what I looked at today, we were around $190,000 higher than budgeted for UUT. Real property transfer taxes are where we had a huge gain. So we increased the tax rate in November, but in addition to that, because of COVID, there's been a number of property deals. A number of people are buying houses or selling houses. And so we have recognized a huge amount of real property transfer tax. So those first three items listed here were all increases from what we expected. You'll notice that the transfers in are less than expected. The transfers in are never going to exceed what is budgeted. Transfers in are specifically related to expenses that the city, in the city's general fund. So pension expenses, maintenance expenses, other things that are covered by special revenues. And the way that it works is we will only ever transfer the lesser of the amount actually expended for these specific items or the amount budgeted. So for transfers in, you're either going to have less than budgeted or budgeted. You're never going to exceed in transfers in. So talking about the impacts of COVID-19 on these revenue changes, I kind of touched on it on the previous slide. Ongoing is the property taxes. I don't anticipate at this point that we're going to see a huge change in non-payment of property taxes. So I would be comfortable at a mid-year update suggesting that we increase what we expect to bring in property taxes. Things that I'm not so sure about are sales and use taxes. It looks like things are going well, but who knows at this point? We might have another wave coming. We don't know if things are going to shut down. If things open back up again, we don't know if people will stop buying online and start buying brick and mortar, which won't come to Albany. So I'm very hesitant to change anything related to sales and use taxes right now. The same with under franchise and other taxes, the UUT. I don't know what the shift in people working from home is going to do on utility rates. I don't know what, the shift of commercial businesses, along Solano or San Pablo, restaurants closing, restaurants opening. We don't really know where we're going to land on that yet. So I'm very hesitant to change it from where it is based on past history, because the changes related to COVID are so up in the air. I'm really waiting to see where it lands before we make any changes. The other thing that is uncertain is charges for services, the ambulance fees. Ambulance fees went down drastically due to COVID. People just didn't want to, be brought to the hospital. So we had a lot less ambulance calls. That's coming back up. So it's really just kind of waiting and seeing what happens with that. And then the property transfer taxes, I do not anticipate that this is going to be an ongoing increase in revenue. People only sell their houses, once every few years. I don't anticipate that we're going to have the turnover that we're currently having, because when I looked at the first 3 quarters, everything seemed to be on track to be around where we budgeted for. 4th quarter, all of a sudden everything blew up and we got a ton more revenue than we were expecting. So I don't anticipate that that is going to continue. So I would not suggest making any changes to what is budgeted for property transfer taxes.
Can I ask a question about that, or should I wait till you're done?
Oh, you can ask a question, sure.
Okay, so when I, on that last point, the property transfer tax, when I look, I think it's page 3 of the staff report that just has by year what the numbers are.
Uh-huh.
I mean, to me, just looking at 2022, even if I took away 2021, 2022 looks light if I take into account, you know, a 10% increase in the tax rate plus whatever percent increase in property values. If I just apply those to 18, 19, and 20, it seems like it's going to be higher. So I don't know, when I looked at it, I thought, oh, well, that budget number could go up just based on, you know, some simple increase in property values and the property tax rate.
Yeah, so that's something when we did the analysis for the tax rate increase, what I did was I took the data from the last 3 years of housing sales and I said, okay, what was the average value? If the tax had been what we had now, what would the average increase have been, and kind of, you know, averaged it out that way. We are seeing an increase in value, but at the same time, is there going to be a bubble? We don't know. So in property values are increasing continuously, and Albany's property values, when the bubble burst, Albany's property values came back much quicker than other cities in Alameda County. So I don't anticipate that, you know, there'll be a huge decrease if anything happens, but I also don't know how much it's going to increase at what rate. So there might be a little room for increasing it, but I'm also wondering at this point, if we had all of these sales in fourth quarter, is that going to slow down? So are people going, did we buy all the houses we're going to buy? And so we're going to have less sales in the next year. I don't know. So that's one of those things where I'd probably leave it where it is for now. But we could update it at mid-year depending on what we see coming in the first 2 quarters. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It seems, maybe I'm being wrong. It seems like you're budgeting a little bit conservatively in terms of, and by that I mean trying to make sure that the actual revenue is at or exceeds what you budgeted, and which makes sense. My guess is it'll come in a little higher, but yeah. Yeah,
and that's one of those things, especially now where we're not budgeting for capital expenditures and we have all these unfunded pension liabilities. I would rather budget conservatively for revenues and have a surplus that we can apply to reserves than think that we're going to have a lot more and then, you know, spend things on programs that we can't continue in the future. Or we can work budgeting for assets into our budget. I am 100% behind that. But those aren't the fun things that people like to look at when they look at a budget. So,
okay.
There's a lot of, yeah.
Is there a breakout anywhere of the different items that are included in these revenue line items, like franchise and other taxes? I gather that's where the property transfer taxes are included. Correct. Is there anywhere on this where we can see where all those sort of smaller line items roll up into?
There is not. The budget that is presented is a sum of thousands of lines of accounts. The city's chart of accounts is slightly unwieldy. So we're trying to streamline that. It's a balance between, you know, how much are people actually going to look at versus, you know, what do you need? I can provide that for you though, if you would like.
Yeah, I may be the only person that's ever asked you for a chart of accounts, but
The
if I could
auditors
have
do
that,
every year.
that would be great. That would be helpful, I think, just to follow along where we might, where we might differ or wonder if certain things might be increased over what they are.
And that was why I specifically called out the property transfer tax in the staff report and said it's this year over year, so that you can see that one line item, what it looks like, instead of it being in that group.
How many pages is your chart of accounts?
It's my my finance manager keeps hers in a binder. So
Inch, 2 inch, 3 inch?
it's just a half inch.
Oh, that's not, okay, that's
Yeah.
being curious. Oh,
All right. So expenses. In the staff report, I talk about how we're at like 88% to budget overall citywide. And generally, when I'm looking at expense accounts, not salaries, but other expenses, I'm saying if I'm within 10% either way, like over budget or under budget in any given line, I've budgeted appropriately, because you're never going to hit it exactly unless it's a contract that is capped at a certain thing. So at that point, you start getting into very specific lines. I spend a lot of time with individual department heads talking about, what can you do with this line? What can you do with this line? The expenses that are most under budget are police and public works, and this comes up very often. Salaries and benefits for police, they were under last year because we had a number of unfilled positions. We have since filled the majority of those positions, and we are currently only down one dispatcher position, which we are actively recruiting for, and 2 sergeant positions. So there will still be some salary savings in the police budget, but the $1 million in salary savings that we had looked at in previous years is definitely not going to be realized in the current year. The other thing that you look at is their professional services line. In this year in particular, because schools weren't there, we didn't pay for crossing guards. So $150,000 of the professional services for police, we didn't spend, and that was for crossing guards. We also talk in the staff report about how, in general, there are lines that you're going to budget for hoping you don't need them. And for police, that's their professional services. They have lab services that they don't use very often, but when there was a murder in 2018, they blew their budget out of the water because they had to use the lab. Now, knock on wood, that's not something that's going to happen very often, but when it does, you need to have that money there. So those kind of lines are the, I need to budget it, but I hope I don't need it, but it still needs to be there. So there may be some lines that are just always going to be less than that 10% that, we go for. And public works is also a great example of that. You never want to be fully spent in public works or something went horribly, horribly wrong. So you budget for larger, not huge, maintenance emergencies, but smaller maintenance emergencies that are going to be a couple $1,000s, and you hope that you don't need them, but sometimes a roof leaks and you need to patch things up, and you need to buy materials, or you need to get a contractor to come in and fix something, and you budget for 1 or 2 of those a year, hoping you don't need them. But if it happens, you need that money there. So there may be lines that appear to only be 60% spent, but that's because that other 40% is if one thing goes wrong, we need that money. So public works, I generally say, you're hoping that they're going to be about 80% spent. Currently, they're at 60%. A lot of that is staff turnover. They had a number of empty maintenance worker positions for a while. Not all of their positions have been filled, but they are a lot more staff than they were like during the pandemic at different times. So we will see that once they become fully staffed, just like with police, we'll see their salaries going back up. But again, professional services, it's never going to be we hope it's never going to be 100% spent or something went horribly wrong. The impacts of COVID on our expenses from 2021. So we had decreases in part-time staffing. Now that the after-school program is coming back and we are open and doing passports again, we are going to see an increase in our part-time staffing expenses. We have budgeted for that, but I'm talking, actual numbers, which is part of why we had, that a larger surplus this year than anticipated, because we didn't have as many part-time staff. We had increases in expenses for certain things like cleaning costs, homeless services, and technology costs, because we had to set people up for working from home. We had to, purchase things to do remote meetings. We had to make sure that we had the ability to still function while we weren't in person. And so there were increased technology costs related to COVID. And so that's really it for the presentation that I had. Again, the numbers that you got are not final. So you will see when it goes to council in September that, the numbers are going to change slightly. And then by the time the audit happens, there are probably going to be a couple of more adjustments or something like that. So expect the numbers to change, but I don't expect them to change drastically.
So when you talked about the increased technology costs and just other things like that were COVID related, is that generally falling into the general government expenditures, which is right at about 100%?
Yes. So you're going to have, so IT and communications, which KALB, the cable channel, we're now considering communications in the hierarchy of the city. And those expenses, some of which were one time, like there were certain cameras that we needed to buy for video conferencing, or different things for staff that we needed to buy that were one-time expenses. But there are some things that you're going to see are ongoing, like Zoom licenses or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's general government.
Okay.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Risk management.
Yes.
What the heck is it?
Yeah.
And why did we spend 15% over budget on that?
So
I'm just really curious.
Yeah. Risk management is mostly our insurance costs. And we were over budget because the actual insurance costs didn't come out until after we had passed a budget. But it's not like we can't pay our insurance costs. So that particular line was over. However, it didn't affect overall the city's expense allocations. So we didn't need to go back to council to make any adjustments to that. Insurance costs are going to continue to increase. That is something that cyber insurance is through the roof.
What? I'm sorry, say it again.
Cyber insurance is through the roof.
Oh, yes.
And you need it because there are a number of cities in the Bay Area that have had ransomware attacks, and it's a mess if that happens. The workers' comp is going to go up because of COVID. And there's just insurance across the Bay Area for everything is increasing. We are part of a group that is kind of, we're self-insured, but we have like the group is self-insured and we are a member of the group anyway. And they do a lot of work to try to get us the best prices. And but they're still going up. So I don't know where we're going to end up this year. Those are all due July. So we just paid that. It went up again this year. I think it's still going to be more than what we budgeted. I didn't look at it before I got on here, but and other than insurance costs, risk management includes certain preparations for the Emergency Operations Center, disaster preparedness training, any sort of training that would go towards, you know, lessening the city's liability if something happened. We're working really hard to kind of beef up our risk like analysis in the city to make sure that we protect ourselves against future losses.
I have a question also. Right below the risk management was the city attorney department, and that's only about half of the budgeted amount. What happened there?
That's another one of those where you don't need it unless one thing goes wrong.
Okay.
And there have been a handful of litigation cases that have in previous years made that amount go above the 290,000. So we've kept it there as kind of a hedge for if something goes wrong, we know we, you know, need it to make sure that we are covered in case something happens.
Do we pay for that then just based on time used?
Yeah, so the city attorney, we have a retainer with them for normal work things. Whenever I have tax questions or, you know, that they help with that. But when it comes to actual litigation, they often need to, you know, consult with other firms or, you know, suggest that we bring in specific firms that specialize in certain things. And at that point, if it's not covered by our insurance, at that point it is a by hour, just like any other attorney.
Okay.
Can you pull this up on the screen and just go over the, this is the summary by department and the citywide budget, and help me and the public for posterity understand the fiscal year. Yeah, the top one there. Yeah.
Sure. So this is the budget that council passed in February. So it was the budget amendment. So this is what we were looking at and what we anticipated. We anticipated spending more than we bring in revenues by $1.5 million. We expected salaries and benefits to be 18.26 million, and we expected other expenses to be 7.3. And by expected, I mean, we budgeted for in case. Then you go down and it says, this is what we spent in this quarter. This is what we spent in this quarter, or spent or brought in. And you can see, like I said, you know, our insurance and our unfunded pension liability is due first quarter. So you have a major jump in expenses in first quarter. That's going to happen every year. Then
So that will happen every year?
Oh yes, because they're always due July 31st.
Okay.
So they're due month one. Then property taxes are due in 2 installments. property taxes are due in the second quarter. And then we get the rest of the money in the fourth quarter. So so there are large increases in revenue in quarter 2 and quarter 4 compared to quarter 1 and quarter 3. So this is just literally breaking it down by, this is what has happened since I last saw you. And then at the end, I say, okay, this is the total of the quarters that you are seeing. So in the end, as of whatever date I ran this report, July 23rd, we spent $22 million. We brought in $23.9 million. And so we, in theory, have a surplus of $1.2 million.
And where is that $1.2 million?
So once the audit is complete, it will fold back into the general fund balance, and the city manager will come forward with suggestions on how we allocate that. We currently have enough money in our general fund reserve to cover our 25% fund balance reserve and our current projected deficit. But so we'll probably suggest that it goes towards asset capital reserve funds. And then it's not
Excuse me.
here. Go ahead.
I thought in the staff report, I thought you recommended that it goes to unfunded pension liabilities.
So we have a separate fund. This is just general fund.
Okay.
We have a separate fund for pension, the pension override tax. I would suggest that the surplus that we recognized for this year in that fund go towards an additional payment in addition to the $500,000 additional payment that we already have budgeted for fiscal year 22. We will suggest most likely making an additional payment to pay down unfunded pension liabilities.
Good.
So I'm just wondering if the, so that pension fund that you're referencing, or what we would use to pay down unfunded pension liabilities together with this general fund surplus of 1.2, if the two of those things are combining to account for the big increase in cash. I noticed on the last page of the report, the Mechanics Bank main account is up by about 2.9 million over the previous year. And so we have that general fund surplus of about 1.2. And I know there are accrual concepts at work here, and we're not trying to do a cash flows statement or anything, but just kind of trying to get a handle on
Why it
what's the other big factor that caused that to go up by almost $3 million?
So there's a handful of things. One is, if we did get into cash flow, month 1, I have to pay over $1 million in insurance costs and $2.4 million in unfunded pension liability, UAL required payment. So month 1 of next fiscal year, I have to send out the door over $3 million. So there has to be money in there from the previous year that carries over so that I can pay those things. So that is part of that increase in cash that you see. But another part is, yes, we added to the surplus, or the surplus added to fund balance. So that is going to be, you're going to have a little bit more cash, floating around. And we had a surplus last year that we have allocated to reserves. So those reserves didn't exist in previous years. So we are building up more cash reserves to pay for future asset purchases that we don't have a plan to pay for at this point. some of that money is also restricted. We have, I think it's almost $2 million in Measure B and BB funds from Alameda County Transportation Commission for very specific things. There's one part of it goes to roads, part of it goes to bike and pedestrian improvements, and part of it goes to paratransit. You're also looking at, in that cash number, you're looking at our sewer enterprise fund, which you're not seeing on your quarterly update. The sewer enterprise fund, last time I looked, had $6 million of fund balance that we are going to be quickly paying down, or buying down, as we do some major sewer lateral replacements over the next couple of years. And then there's storm drain in there too. I don't think we got the 2.3. I think we got the 2.3 million of the ARPA funds in July, so it wouldn't be in that report, but we do have a lot of cash. That is accurate. Most of it is like in very specific, like for very specific things. A lot of it is, well, our general fund reserve is supposed to be 25% of budgeted expenses. So it's supposed to be, I can't do this in my head, 25, 631,030 times 0.25. So it's like 6.5 million is our general fund reserve balance that we are specifically holding to, in case something goes wrong. Like, because we did a risk analysis in 2019, I think, of what the suggested percentage should be for that reserve, and it came back at 25%. So in addition to that 6 point whatever I just said, we also have budgeted a $1.8 million deficit for this year. So that is added to that general fund balance to make sure we stay above the 25%. So if you're looking at that cash, I'm keeping $8 million to make sure we cover our deficit and have the 25% left.
Okay. So just in terms of just kind of trying to get a handle on the change from last year to this year. So it sounds like there are a lot of special revenues flowing into cash that account for a big portion of the delta between last year and this year, in addition to our general fund surplus.
Yes.
Okay.
And if you think about it, every year when our expense budget increases, our reserve will increase because it's a percentage, not a flat dollar amount. So we're required to keep more and more to hit that 25%.
And the definition of the general fund reserve is 25% of general operating expenses. Is that the definition?
The general fund, yeah.
Okay.
Remember, Papalia, if you're trying to talk to us, you're on mute.
Yeah. So that 25%, is that one of those? Is that the 23 million? I mean, the 22 million that we spent? It's supposed to be 25% of that?
No, it's a budgeted. So it's 25% of 25.
Okay.
Allowed for carry forward.
Yeah, it's like 6.4 million.
Right.
I have one question. Heather, I'm curious to know if staff has discussed or if the council has discussed. I noticed in your report, starting in the bottom, page 3 and 4, the use of the utilities money being directed towards could portion of a third of it, I guess, could be directed towards the sustainability, environmental sustainability programs.
Mhm.
I'm just curious, is the staff or the council looked at, I know we're looking at capital improvements and things like that. Could fleets, you know, fleet efficiencies are being looked at, I'm sure, I'm thinking.
Yeah, so that's something that for, you know, climate initiatives and all of that, we're coming at that from a number of different angles. So we do have purchasing policies in place where we basically look for, you know, we're already looking for more fuel efficient vehicles, hybrids, things like that. But we also do a cost analysis of, you know, what is that increased cost? You know, is it, we have a fiduciary duty to protect taxpayer money. And so while it would be great to buy the pickup truck that can like power your house on its batteries, like it's really expensive. So we can't do that. So we kind of have to meet in the middle in certain cases. We do spend a little bit more on certain products when we know that they're going to be, you know, fuel efficient, or like we got hybrid police cruisers. There was an analysis done of, you know, how much you'd save over the, you know, life of the cruiser on gas versus the hybrid versus, you know, whatever. So we are really trying to move forward to that, or move towards that. And that is an idea. We have sort of broached this at the council level at one point of potentially taking that money and putting it in another, like its own reserve fund, updating the capital reserve policy to include a climate action, I don't know what you want to call it, fund, so that when we're doing projects that, you know, there is more fuel efficient, or, you know, if we're thinking about upgrading a heating system, if we can get, you know, a more environmentally friendly system, but it's going to cost more money, can we pull money out of that fund to make up the difference? I copied and pasted the wording from the ordinance in there, and it is very clear that the money should be used first to fund projects in the climate action plan that was approved by council. But it's also important to know that this was passed as a general fund tax. So in my mind, how I would like it to work, but, you know, it needs to go to council and, you know, go through all of that, is what I would do is at the end of the year say, do we have a surplus? Great. Let's go back to all of these things that we said it would be nice if we could, and, you know, allocate them out that way. But when we're looking at a $1.8 million deficit, it's really hard for me to say, yes, we 100% right from the get-go should take a third of all of that money that we bring and set it aside for something that we're not going to be able to use for, you know, however many years anyway, because it's $33,000 and all of those projects are at least 150 each.
But this $33,000 for 1 quarter of, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I was mostly just curious, the restrictions on it, and really restrictions on it in relationship to like using it for fleets for economic, efficiency of fleet efficiency and solar energy conversion, or something like that.
So
that answers
it's general fund money, so there are no restrictions.
Okay, great.
Besides the usual restrictions.
I have a quick question about the pension. There's a little discussion about the discount rate.
Yes.
So if you could go over that briefly. I was confused because I thought it was saying the discount rate was going to go down, and I thought that would increase the discounted liabilities. But
so
Good question.
gosh, actuaries.
Hey, I didn't say anything about risk management.
So I watched a whole thing about this. And so what happens is, because CalPERS passed a policy that said if it makes a return in any given year over what they expected, they have a formula that they put in to say, this is what we are going to lower the discount rate. Now, the discount rate is the amount that they assume they are going to make on investments in future years. So if they lower how much they think they are going to make, but our liability doesn't lower, we now have to pay more upfront to get to that liability in the same number of years. So basically, the policy was made assuming that, you know, when we made 21.3% or whatever ridiculous number they made last year, things would be great. And so everyone would have a little extra cash to start paying more for their pension obligations. That didn't happen. But the market went gangbusters during COVID. While, you know, everyone else is struggling, the market is like, yes, this is the perfect time. So CalPERS made 23, I think I put 18 in my report, but now it's come out that it's like 21 or 23%, something ridiculous. And so they have decided that they're still going to honor this policy. So the discount rate is reduced from 7% to 6.8%. So again, I'm going to try to walk through this in my head. When the discount rate is what they assume they are going to make on the investments that they have. So they assumed they were going to make 7%. They made 23%. Normally they assume they're going to make 7 and they make like 3. So whatever. But now they're saying, all right, we don't think we're going to make 7. We think we're going to make 6.8. So our revenue in future years, our assumed revenue in future years goes down. But the amount that we are going to have to pay to pensioners does not go down. So the city has to make up that difference in current payments.
Dollars.
So here's my disconnect.
Mhm.
If the discount rate goes down, I can see that the funding for the current year needs to go up, because whatever money you put in is not going to earn as much. They're assuming it's not going to earn as much investment income. So your rate goes up. That makes sense.
Right.
But you're also funding for the deficit, and the deficit is the difference between the liabilities and assets. So yeah, your liabilities, your net present value liabilities went up because you're not discounting as much, but your assets went way up. So I guess it seemed like, I would think that if it earned 20-something%, the deficit would go way down. And so the extra funding, not for the current year, but the extra funding to make up whatever deficit there is, should be a lot less, because there's so much more assets in there. And so that was the part I was trying to puzzle through in the discussion, and I couldn't figure it out.
So in general, yes. However, for the last 15 years, they haven't made what they thought they were going to. So the city is still paying with our unfunded liability past deficit makeup. I had to, when I went to pay the additional $500,000 to the pension plan for 2021, we met with the actuary to kind of determine where to put it and how to apply it and all of these different things. I got to the point where I looked at him and I was like, why won't you just take my money? Because there were so many like decisions to make of how to apply it, to what year, to what, and I was like, I just want to give you $500,000. Just take my money. And so, but a lot of what it was we still have massive deficits from previous years where they assumed they were going to make 7-8% and they didn't.
Right. No, I understand that. I guess I'm hoping that our unfunded liability went way down. I mean, I understand there's still a big unfunded liability, but I'm hoping that if they earn 20 something percent, that somewhere it should have gone down significantly.
You'd think that our assets would increase, right?
Yeah.
I hope, but
Okay.
I won't know until the actuarial evaluation comes out
Got
in
it.
2022.
Okay.
How often do we get a report on that unfunded pension liability?
So this is something that people would like to add to future agendas, and so I'm going to talk about that then. Don't get mad at me. I am going to talk about it then. But the city has 9 pension plans. There are 8 in CalPERS, and then we have the closed police and fire pension plan. So historically, the city council hasn't really gotten much of, an update on these until a couple of years ago. We had a consultant come in and kind of look at our whole deal and say, this is where we think you're going to end up. CalPERS valuations come out every year. The valuation for the closed police and fire pension plan is done separately as part of the audit for the police and fire pension plan itself. And I plan on bringing back more information yearly, at least, with ideas of how to, how to actually pay these things in, which way. With CalPERS, we're kind of stuck. They have rules of you need to be 100% funded and you're going to get there in 20 years and you have to pay us in order to get that done. Personally, do I think you need to be 100% funded in a pension plan? No. But I don't have that choice. We don't really have any options in CalPERS. We do have options in the closed police and fire pension plan. But I am going to add this as a future agenda item to bring and talk about in more detail at another meeting.
Thank you.
Is there another, there's a pension board, isn't there?
So the pension board is very specific to the closed police and fire pension plan, and it is administrative. They, approve the invoices for the police and fire pension plan. They, monitor rate changes that the city calculates, and they basically review the investment, the company that has the investment, the equity investment for the city's police and fire pension plan comes and does a presentation, and they make decisions on, whether it's invested appropriately. But they are very administrative. They do not have any control over how the assets are, how the city funds the plan or anything like that.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments on the presentation? Member Papalia?
Yeah, so in the staff report, it says city staff are actively working with East Bay Municipal Utility District to begin collection of a new tax on water services. What is this tax? When is it supposed to start? And am I correct that I guess we voted for that last year?
Yeah, the rate increase to the utility users tax that was voted on in November, there was an increase to gas and electric from 7 to 9.5. And then you we added a tax to water at 7%. And in theory, per the Public Utilities Code, the tax should have been collected 90 days or implemented 90 days after the utility district was notified of the implementation of the tax. We're working on it.
You mean 90 days from November or last November?
I mailed East Bay Mud the notification on Christmas Eve. That was
On
a
when?
fun trip to the post office. So we had anticipated having it collected in April. That has not happened yet. We are actively working on it.
So does that mean that they just can get away with not collecting it, or can you demand back payments or back charges or what?
It's complicated. In theory, yes, we could get back payments. Who owes those payments? Technically you as residents. So we are trying to get this done as expediently as possible without all of a sudden you guys getting massive bills for back taxes. And there's a lot of legal mumbo jumbo, and this is where if I really want to dig my heels in, you know, that $290,000 in legal services is real quickly going to add up.
And where does that money go? Just into the general fund?
Yes.
And that's under, is that under franchise and other taxes in the general
Correct.
fund?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
So was that, but if it was supposed to be collected in April, May, June, did you budget? Was it in the budget as 3 months worth of, but that we didn't get, right? So that's how you budget for something, but then it didn't arrive. Got it.
Right.
Okay. Real world.
Right. Well, and it looks like even without having received that, we were still at 109% of budget for that caption as a whole.
And again, remember that's because of the massive increase in transfer tax, real property transfer taxes.
Right. Which
We
was
got-
maybe a one-time thing.
Right, because I budgeted, I think it was like $80,000 for the water utility, the utility users tax, and we got over $800,000 in excess real property transfer tax. So, yeah.
That was lucky.
Now, there was
Yeah.
something in that report which said that this county was withholding a certain amount of money because they thought people weren't going to be able to pay.
So there are always delinquent property taxpayers. And the county, I think it's called teeter. I don't know, people throw around words. They withhold 4% on a regular basis, assuming people are not going to pay their property taxes. Because of COVID and the fact that they didn't really know what was happening, they increased that from 4 to 5. So they withheld, assuming people weren't going to pay. We will get that back if people pay.
So when
So do
people,
I- Oh, go ahead.
when people don't pay, at some point they have to pay.
Yep.
And then that comes in as just as unbudgeted.
It's lumped into the property tax line on there, any like back payments. So it
But-
all goes into that line eventually, but whether we actually receive the money or not is the question.
But if they're withholding a certain amount of money because they're expecting something not to be paid, and then the next year they withhold more, and then the next year they withhold more, then at some point though, those taxes get paid because you can't get away from it. You never get away from real estate taxes.
I mean,
Always, it's gonna get paid when you die. If
when the house is sold, yeah.
it gets paid after 5 years, because unpaid property taxes, if you don't pay your taxes for 5 years, the county can
Foreclose.
sell your property. So at some point it gets paid. So I'm just, so my question is, are they holding on to do we know how much money they've withheld from us?
I don't know.
Whether it's accurate or not.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Don't you have that money now though, or you're expecting it to come in this year or early next year, or if it's paid?
If it's paid, yes, next year.
Okay.
But I don't know how much that was. And that was why we budgeted less, because we didn't know how many people were going to lose their job. And the other thing was, like with all of the rental, not abatements, but like the inability of landlords to kick people out. And, we didn't know if the county was going to waive property taxes for certain people if it was related to COVID. I mean, there were so many things that were up in the air specifically around COVID that we just kept it as is. And we're like, I don't really want to do a lot to it because I don't know what's going to happen. Like I said, at this point, because we know that the people of Albany have been paying their taxes, I'm comfortable coming at a mid-year update and increasing the amount that we expect to bring in fiscal year 22. When we did the budget last year, I was not comfortable doing that.
So you get a report, I'm assuming, from the county, from Alameda County, saying, yes, we did collect the property taxes at a good rate. And so you know that you're going to get those receipts.
I get a text file.
You get what?
A text file. Yeah.
Oh,
Not even in Excel. Yep.
that's high tech. Okay.
And I will say it has not been my top priority in the last 3 years to analyze all of that. There have been a number of other fires that we have been working on. And in addition, I just became treasurer in December. So, some of these things are things that I will probably, as time goes on, be able to tell you off the top of my head, this much is how much but it is not something that has been, I know that the county is doing what they do and we get money on a regular basis. So at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard. I'm sure it's hard to keep tabs on all of that stuff. And at the same time, it's 36% of the revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the huge revenue item. So I guess, if you're missing a couple percent of that, then that's pretty big for us.
Yeah. So that is something that is on my list of things to, get a better handle on at this point and make sure that, the county is doing things properly for us and just, that was another set of eyes.
Yeah. Right. Any other comments? Okay. I think, thank you for that presentation, Heather. And I think that completes that section of the agenda. So then the next section of the agenda is titled Discussion and Possible Action on Matters Related to the Following Items, and it says none. So I think that means we just move on past that.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, and actually, I think I was supposed to ask for public comment on the presentation, but there is no one here from the public. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So then that takes us to item number 7, future agenda items, where I think at this point we might want to put some things on the agenda with respect to the minutes.
And just so you know, at this point, I do take notes of what the agenda is set by, between myself and the chair. The chair really sets the agenda. So I keep track of the future agenda items that you guys list and work with the chair to set the agenda.
So I guess I would just like to follow up on the pension reporting point of discussion. I think it would be great to see one of those pension reports and have a little bit more in-depth discussion of the unfunded pension liability, as I think as the years go on, that's going to become one of our very major budget line items.
I have a question. Our next meeting is in November, correct?
Yes.
And that's the last meeting for the year. Is there something that we're supposed to be doing in November as part of the work plan related to budget or anything?
I'm going to bring the work plan back to you. The city council amended the template for the work plan. So we just need to do a small adjustment. But yeah, as far as budget, that will not come up until the meeting after.
So I'd like to have an agenda item that was basically a self-examination of how our first year went. You know, we were all new to this, and it would be nice to be able to discuss and hear, because I can't, we have really no opportunity to socialize together. Often I've been on a committee like this where I've known people in the past and I've seen them as a mixer here and there, and so I would like to have kind of a, I don't know, a yearly the 2021 assessment of how things went and areas that we think we want to do more of. Like I think including having some subcommittees, the discussion of subcommittees that could be put together so that we have something to work on over the holidays, until the next meeting. For instance, some of us are very interested in pensions. I'm not that interested in delving into the nitty gritty of it. And I really want to hear what some other people who have a keener interest in that, come up with their point of view that their research brings up. Well, I'm more interested in working on different avenues that could bring in more revenue without taxing people. So
I have a requested agenda item. I've been thinking this, but I can understand when I talk about this, how this might be somewhat kind of jarring to some people, because when I first heard it working in a public environment at the university as a public servant, it jarred me. And we had to do it because of the disinvestment in the higher education state. But anyway, I'm curious to know how the city has looked into benefits or downsides of establishing an endowment for the city. And I say about that sounds jarring, and it does sound jarring, but I really actually think that that's the wave, many of the wave of the future, because of the expenses are increasing, as inflation is coming, and will be increasingly difficult to live here. And with each passing generation, it gets untenable in many ways. And this is a longer term generational approach. It's not immediate. but it should be considered. And I understand there'll be a lot of people who will not give because they don't give, or they give, they want to give somewhere else or something. But I really believe there are an abundance of large and small philanthropists, excuse me, out there. That'd be willing to give back to our urban village. Anyway, there are advantages for giving for those people and who would be willing to give. And it's something that could be built on over years and generations. Anyway, I see it as a win-win for potentially for the city down the line and for people who'd like to donate. And it gets away from taxation so much, because I think it's going to get harder and harder. I just, anyway, that's something I'd like to think about. As far as I know, that question was brought up at a gathering I went to. We're lucky enough to have a family cabin in the Sierra National Forest, and our cabin, our tract was in the camp. It was in the camp, the fire, the creek fire. And so in our tract of 43 cabins, there's only 20 left. And so we're talking, there's multiple tracts on the cabin on the lake itself, but we're talking about endowments. And somebody who I know who has a business and also they run businesses in many ways, they said cities need to start looking into endowments. They really need to start building that, because it's a potential for another revenue source down the line. Anyway, so that's enough.
Okay.
Add that agenda, please. Yes.
Okay.
I have a couple things too. I really like that, by the way. So I guess what we're doing is kind of brainstorming or just putting out there potential agenda items, and we'll decide which ones are actually going to be in the next meeting and maybe which ones will be tabled or whatever. But kind of building off of what Member Benker just said, it seems to me that's a really good strategic issue. And one of the things that we talked about last time or the last few meetings is sort of budgeting in the context of the strategic plan. And so I'm not clear when the strategic planning happens, and if so, how we participate, but I want to make sure that we in some ways do participate and that it becomes part of our agendized discussion when it does happen. So
the city council has been actively working on their strategic plan. They have study sessions normally before their normal meetings. I don't know, Anne, are you listening?
I'm here.
Do you know when is the strategic plan coming back to council at some point?
I believe so, probably in September, but not as a study session.
Not as a study session, but they will accept public comment.
It's as, yes, as an item on the agenda that public comment can be submitted.
So is my understanding correct that if we want to talk about the strategic plan, we need to have it as an agenda item? And so I don't know how to go about this, but it seems like maybe.
So you'd like an agenda item talking about the council strategic plan and how the financial advisory committee can further the items in the plan?
Right, and I'm not sure if one or a group of us should make a point of getting involved in that, or if that's a staff thing reporting to us. I don't know.
I can let you guys know when that agenda is published, and I can send out an email showing, providing you the last one that went to them, so that you can kind of look and see what they discussed last time and kind of where they ended up. And that way, maybe that'll help you frame kind of the public comments that you want to make or whatever.
Okay.
Just to let you know that the council has went through all the goals already and the objectives of the strategic plan. And as you as a member of the public can always comment on items on the agenda, and you can also sign up for e-notification for council agenda, so that when council agenda are released, then you get an email of all the items on the agenda.
Okay.
Excuse me, I'm still a little confused here about our work plan. And I'm going to read again from the ordinance that created our group. The Finance Advisory Committee will be tasked with review of non-administrative finance policies, such as the city's fund balance policy and the city's investment policies, and make recommendations to the city council regarding investments to assure maximum returns. The committee shall also review and advise on the development of a long-term financial plan for the city and conduct a review of the annual audit and management letter, and provide the city council with any recommendations related to the annual audit. Now, I do understand that we're all just learning about how this all works, okay? And I'm certainly not prepared to make recommendations necessarily at not this moment about the long-term planning. But I would like this to be our goal, is to be prepared next year after we've earned our stripes over this, because there's a lot to learn. And that's the point of this committee, is to dive deeper into these kinds of topics and then bring that work product to the council.
Will there, so I think Heather mentioned that the city council had amended the template for the work plan, and I don't know, does that mean that the work plan that we had previously suggested has not been adopted or approved by council?
Correct. It hasn't gone to council yet because when we were going to bring it, they had decided they wanted to change the template, and I need to bring it back to you guys because while the goals are fine, it just needs to be reorganized to what your top priorities are. And I'm going to bring that back in November. And so then after you guys approve it, we will bring it back to council for them to approve.
Okay. It just seems like we need to get that plan finalized, because those will be the future agenda items.
What are we doing?
Right.
Some of these
So,
to be fairly static, like the quarterly budget update, and Member Hublia, you talked about the audit, like that's going to come when it's done. And so that will just happen every year. And, the review of those policies, that happens along with the budget every year. So those things will just come up naturally as they, as we progress through the year. They aren't necessarily things that you need to add ahead of time, unless you have a concern about something. Like talking about investments, we were talking about how much cash we have. One of the things that I would like to do is put out an RFP to potentially get an asset manager, to a professional that we entrust investing money to. And when we get responses to those RFPs, those will come to you guys for review before we bring them to the council to suggest. So, but that's something that I haven't had the time to put together the RFP yet. So those kind of things will kind of happen as staff has time, but aren't necessarily things that I'm not expecting the committee to put the RFP together. So.
I just want to say that I'm seeing this budget now. It's really great because we've seen all the iterations, or I've seen all the iterations up to this point, and we've been asking all these questions. And sometimes it takes me asking or hearing the same question being asked and being answered 2 or 3 times, just in a little different way. And it's starting to make sense now because, you know, I do get budgeting, you know, and shortfalls and the 10%. I'll never forget the 10% that you try to hit within that, because that's really crucial. And so you can't predict. So thanks.
Well, I guess one other thing that I'm wondering, how will we come back to this topic and wrap it up? So we did decide to postpone accepting the minutes of the previous meeting. And there's that sort of disagreement about, you know, there not being enough detail in the minutes. And so how do we propose to resolve that? And does anybody want to take on researching some of the other committee minutes so that we could have some other examples if you think that it's being done differently in another committee, and that we might be able to follow that? Do you want to look into that a little bit, Member Papalia?
Yes.
Okay. So because I think we have to come back to that topic and decide if we're going to accept them the way they are, or if not, what do we need to do about it?
I don't think it's going to take up a lot of time in the next meeting. It's just, you know, we heard it, and the chair will be back and be able to put her input in.
Okay.
I mean, that's another advantage of not voting for it when, you know, the chair wasn't here, and well, hopefully she will be back and we'll have a full contingent then.
All right. Are there any other items for consideration for future agenda?
We have 4, is that right, Kim?
So I suggested that I'd like the pension discussion to happen at a future meeting. We have the work plan that will come back to us with the amended template, and we need to organize our priorities so that we can finalize the work plan. Third is from Member Papalia about sort of a review or an examination or a debrief of how this first year went and areas we could improve. Member Banker suggested establishing an endowment for the city. Member Priven talked about the strategic planning process, you know, as that relates to the budget. I feel like the strategic planning process is important too, and that we need to, I think the strategic plan needs to happen before the budget. And I think it kind of happens the other way around right now, you know, so it's the cart before the horse kind of situation. And then Member Papalia maybe giving a brief description of some of the other minutes. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different notes.
If need be, we can put off the endowments for another time. I get to do some research. I'm not going to be able to come next time, so I won't be there. So I'll be gone.
Okay. Well, I guess at this point, we sort of, this will go through a little bit of discussion, right, Heather, and it'll be determined, you know, whether or not you can put something together about the pension, or maybe that's postponed to a future meeting after November 3rd. So how do we decide, you know, what exactly is agendized for the next meeting?
So I will put these together and send them to the chair, and the chair will help set the agenda.
Okay.
Sorry, can I add one issue that I don't think will be in the next meeting, but I just want to keep it sort of in people's consciousness, which is the auditor, the state audit report that can be used to sort of benchmark the city against other cities in terms of various financial ratios. I just think that when that's available, it'd be interesting. I know, Heather, you've done summaries and reports on that in the past, and I think it'd be good for this committee to hear.
That is on my list too from before.
All right, great. Okay, so the next meeting will be held Wednesday, November 3rd, 7 p.m. And at this point, I believe it's time to adjourn the meeting.
One
Oh,
question.
sorry, one more.
No, I'm sorry, Heather. Stuff will come out about that. We'll get stuff in advance because I can try and look at it before I head out on the 3rd, right?
Yeah. Agendas are required to be posted at least 72 hours before the meeting.
I'll try comments before I head out.
Okay, great. Absent any other comments, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.